Ethiopia was the first Christian kingdom in the world. There's lots of amazing myths and legends surrounding the monasteries of Lake Tana.
The real Adam and Eve story was hidden for 6,000 years, yet what is now emerging is leaving scientists completely baffled. Ancient texts and forgotten accounts appear to contain predictions so precise and detailed that modern science struggles to explain them. Could this be evidence of lost knowledge, or something far more extraordinary? As researchers dig deeper, unsettling connections begin to surface. What exactly was concealed, and why has it remained buried for so long from humanity until now, is revealed in the most shocking way imaginable today, worldwide. A story we thought we knew, but never fully heard. For many generations, the story of the Garden of Eden has been passed down with calm confidence, almost as if nothing about it could be questioned. A serpent enters the scene. Eve is misled. Adam follows her choice. And just like that, humanity falls from grace. It is often told as a simple story, clear, direct, and easy to understand, serving as the starting point of a world filled with struggle and complexity. But what if that familiar version is only a surface-level telling? What if beneath it lies a deeper, older account, one that carries far more weight, meaning, and even mystery than we have been led to believe? Hidden within ancient Ethiopian traditions is a narrative that feels both powerful and unsettling. These traditions, carefully preserved over centuries and studied by scholars such as E.A. Wallace Budge, reveal a perspective that does more than simply describe humanity's fall. Instead, it attempts to answer a much deeper question. Why did it have to happen at all? This version does not rush through the events in the garden as a quick introduction to human history. Rather, it slows down the moment, almost as if inviting us to look closer, to think deeper, and to question what we thought we already understood. It suggests that the fall was not just a mistake or a moment of weakness, but part of a larger unfolding, something that would shape everything that came after. And at the center of this powerful retelling stands Eve, not as a passive figure, not merely as someone who was deceived, but as someone whose role evolved surprisingly and profoundly. In this ancient account, Eve's story does not end with the fall. In fact, it becomes even more significant as her life draws to a close. She transforms into something far greater than what the common narrative presents. She becomes a witness, someone who has seen deeply into events that others only experienced on the surface. She becomes a teacher, one who carries lessons that are not immediately obvious, lessons that require reflection and understanding. And most importantly, she becomes a voice that preserves truths long buried beneath layers of time, tradition, and simplified storytelling. As her final days approach, there is a sense of urgency in her role. It is as though she understands that what she carries must be shared before it is lost. Her words are no longer just about recounting what happened in the past. They begin to stretch beyond that moment, reaching into something much bigger, something that touches the future of all humanity. When Eve finally speaks in this version of the story, her message is not limited to regret or explanation. It carries insight, depth, and even a sense of destiny. She speaks not only of what was lost, but of what was set into motion. Her words suggest that the fall was not the end of something perfect, but the beginning of a journey, one that humanity is still walking today. This perspective changes everything. It invites us to see the story of Eden not as a closed chapter, but as the opening of a much larger narrative. It challenges the idea that the events in the garden were simple or fully understood. Instead, it presents them as layered, meaningful, and deeply connected to the human experience across time. And perhaps most intriguingly, it leaves us with a question that lingers long after the story is told. If Eve's final words were truly meant to guide humanity, have we fully listened? Or have we only heard part of the story? What happened after they left the Garden of Eden? How did they feel about their new life? Let's find out. The cave, the loss, and the weight of 1,000 years. After they were sent out of the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve stepped into a world that felt completely unfamiliar, almost like a place they were never meant to survive in. Everything had changed. The gentle, unending light they once knew was gone. The ease with which they lived, where nothing demanded effort, had disappeared. In its place came a harsh new reality: hunger that needed to be satisfied, tiredness that weighed down their bodies, pain that crept in without warning, and time that moved slowly, marking every passing moment with a sense of loss. They were no longer in a place where everything was given. Now they had to work, to struggle, to endure. The earth beneath their feet was no longer just a garden. It was a land to be tilled, a place that resisted them. Every day became a lesson in survival, and every night reminded them of what they had lost. In the midst of this unfamiliar world, they eventually found a place of refuge. It was hidden away, carved deep into the side of a mountain, a quiet, sacred space that would later be known as the Cave of Treasures. But this cave was not just a shelter from the outside world. It became something much deeper, something meaningful. It held memories, purpose, and a connection to what once was. Adam, with wisdom shaped by both paradise and hardship, gave special instructions about what should be kept in that cave. He placed within it gold, incense, and myrrh, items that, at the time, may have seemed simple, yet carried meanings far beyond their appearance. These were not random objects. They were symbols of kingship, of worship, of something yet to come. Though Adam could not see the future in full, his actions echoed into generations that would come long after him. Years passed, many years. Adam lived a life far longer than what we are used to imagining. He lived for 930 years, witnessing the unfolding of a world that was both beautiful and broken. He saw his children grow, generations begin, and the weight of human life take shape in ways that were new and often painful. But even a life that long must come to an end. When Adam felt that his time was near, there was no panic, no confusion. There was a quiet certainty, a calm acceptance. He gathered those closest to him, Eve, his lifelong companion, and their son Seth. In those final moments, he did not speak with fear, but with purpose. He gave them instructions, clear, thoughtful, and filled with meaning. He told them how to bury him, ensuring that even in death there would be dignity and remembrance. He reminded them of the importance of holding on to what truly mattered, not wealth, not comfort, but devotion to God. Even in a world that had become difficult, even in a life filled with trials, that connection must never be lost. His words were not just instructions, they were a legacy. And then, after all those years, Adam died. For the first time since the beginning of creation, Eve was left alone. This was not just the loss of a husband. It was the loss of a companion who had been with her from the very start, from the garden, through the fall, into the long journey of life outside it. Adam was not just part of her life. He was part of her identity, her memories, her entire existence. Her grief was unlike anything ordinary. It was deep, layered with years of shared experience. She mourned him, the one who had walked beside her through every moment. But her sorrow reached even further. It touched the memory of Eden, the place they could never return to, the life that had been lost forever. In losing Adam, it felt as though she was losing that connection all over again. Overwhelmed by this weight, Eve withdrew from everything around her. She stayed close to where Adam was laid to rest, as if distance itself was unbearable. She refused food. She turned away from comfort. The world around her continued to move, but she seemed to stand still within it. Days passed in silence. There were no distractions, no voices to fill the emptiness, just stillness. And within that stillness, something began to grow. At first, it was only grief, but slowly it became something more. A sense of urgency began to rise within her, quiet but persistent. She began to understand something important. Her time, too, would come. And before that moment arrived, there was something she needed to do, something that could not be left undone. It was not enough to grieve, not enough to remember. Some words had to be spoken, truths that had to be passed on, lessons that could not be buried with her. Sitting there in the silence of loss and memory, Eve realized that her voice still carried a purpose, and before she left this world, she had to speak. What truth did she reveal about Eden? What exactly transpired in the garden? Let's digest Eve's account of what transpired. The truth about Eden, and no one was meant to forget. When Eve called Seth close, she was not simply sharing a story, but passing on a deep and weighty truth that carried great significance for all humanity. Her words served as a warning and a lesson from the past. She described Eden as far more than an ordinary garden. It was a place filled with constant light and life, where darkness, night, and decay did not exist. Everything there was vibrant, whole, and sustained by a steady brilliance that never faded, creating a perfect and peaceful existence, unlike anything experienced in the present world. In that place, even breathing felt different. The air itself seemed alive, nourishing them in a way that gave strength without effort. There was no need to struggle for food or survival. The trees produced fruit continuously, without seasons of shortage or delay. And at the very center stood the tree of life, powerful, luminous, and sustaining. It was more than just a tree. It was a source of ongoing life, keeping them in a state that never weakened, never aged, and never faded. But then Eve's tone shifted as she spoke about the one tree that was different. The forbidden tree. It was not ugly or dangerous to look at. In fact, it was beautiful. Its fruit was appealing, its presence striking. It seemed harmless, even inviting, yet it carried a command from God. Do not approach it, do not eat from it. That command alone made it significant, setting it apart from everything else in the garden. And then came the part that carried the greatest shock, the serpent. Eve did not describe it as a small or ordinary creature. It was not crawling in weakness or hidden in shadows. Instead, it stood upright, impressive, and intelligent, far beyond the other animals. Its appearance and presence were not immediately frightening. In fact, it was almost captivating. What made it truly dangerous was not its form, but its voice. The serpent did not speak in simple lies that were easy to dismiss. Instead, it spoke with logic, with reasoning, with a kind of persuasive intelligence that made its words sound believable. It did not shout or threaten. It questioned. It planted thoughts. It stirred curiosity. It awakened a desire for something more. It did not force Eve to act. It convinced her to think. It suggested that the command given to her was not complete. It hinted that something valuable was being hidden from her. It created doubt, whispering the idea that she could rise beyond her current state, that she could gain knowledge, power, and awareness that she did not yet possess. And in that moment, everything changed. Eve made a choice. She believed the word she heard. She reached out, took the fruit, and ate it. Afterward, Adam followed her, and the effect was immediate. It was not a slow realization. It was instant. The moment they ate, something within their existence shifted. The garments of light that had once covered them, coverings that reflected purity, honor, and divine presence, vanished without warning. For the first time, they experienced something entirely new, the feeling of being exposed. They became aware of themselves in a way they had never known before. Vulnerability entered their awareness. Along with it came shame. They felt uncovered, incomplete, and suddenly aware of their own state. In response, they tried to fix it themselves. They gathered leaves and stitched them together, attempting to cover what had been lost. But their effort could not restore what had vanished. Their handmade coverings were fragile, temporary, and powerless compared to what they had once had. It was the first time humanity tried to solve a deep spiritual loss with physical means. Then came the expulsion. Eve described this moment not as a simple relocation, but as something far more painful, a tearing away. They were removed from the light they had always known, separated from the life that sustained them, and distanced from the presence that had defined their entire existence. It was not just leaving a place. It was leaving a state of being, a way of life that could never be fully regained in the same way. And the weight of that moment did not disappear with time. For nearly 1,000 years, Eve carried the memory of what had happened. She lived long enough to witness generations grow, to see the effects of that single decision ripple through humanity. The memory stayed with her, not just as a story, but as a burden, a lesson, and perhaps even a hope that one day things could be made right again. How much did Eve miss Adam after his death? Did they cross each other's path afterwards? Let's dive into the details of Eve's report about her encounter with Adam. The vision that rewrote everything she believed. After sharing her final message, Eve entered a strange, suspended state, neither awake nor asleep. Then the sky above the cave of treasures opened gently, revealing an intense, pure light unlike the sun. It filled everything, overwhelming the earth with a living brilliance that changed her understanding of existence. Out of that opening came a chariot. It was vast, far greater than anything the human mind could easily grasp. It shone with a radiance that made gold look dull. It did not move like something bound by the laws of the earth. It descended with purpose, carried by 4 mighty beings, each like an eagle in form, yet far more powerful and terrifying in presence. Their wings stretched wide, glowing as though fire itself lived within them. Yet the flames did not consume, they illuminated. And within that chariot was Adam, but not the Adam Eve had buried, not the worn, aging man who had carried the weight of exile, regret, and the long years outside Eden. This Adam stood upright, strong, whole, and alive in a way that felt almost unreal. There was no trace of weakness in him, no sign of decay. He looked as he must have looked at the beginning, complete, untouched, restored. Beside him stood 2 mighty figures, unmistakable in their authority and presence, the archangels Michael and Gabriel. They did not speak loudly, yet everything about them carried command. With calm certainty, they guided Adam forward, leading him towards something that seemed to shimmer into existence before them. It was a body of water, yet it was unlike any river or stream Eve had ever known. The water was so clear, it seemed to hold light within it. It reflected nothing and everything at once, as though it belonged to another realm entirely. There was a stillness to it, a purity that felt deeper than anything found on earth, a place not just of water, but of renewal. Adam stepped into it, and in that single act, everything began to change. It was not dramatic in the way humans expect change to be. There was no struggle, no visible transformation unfolding step by step. Instead, it was immediate and complete. The weight he had carried through the ages, the burden of toil, the sorrow of separation, the quiet exhaustion of a life lived far from Eden, all of it disappeared. Not reduced, not eased. Gone. When he emerged, he was no longer marked by the long history of humanity's beginning. He stood radiant, his form restored to what it was always meant to be. There was a clarity to him, a peace, a completeness that spoke of something far greater than mere survival. He was not just alive again, he was renewed. And in that moment, something broke within Eve, not in pain, but in release. For as long as she could remember, she had carried a heavy, unshakable guilt. She had blamed herself for everything, the loss of Eden, the suffering of their children, the pain that had spread across generations, and even Adam's death. To her, it had all begun with one moment, one choice. She believed she had ruined everything. But now, as she watched this unfolding reality, she saw what she had never been able to see before. Death was not the end she had feared. It was not a final loss, not a closing of all things. It was a passage, a crossing, a return. What she had thought was punishment without hope was, in truth, part of a greater design, one that did not end in destruction, but in restoration. They had not been cast out of Eden to be erased or abandoned forever. They had been sent out with a path that would one day lead them back. And just like that, the crushing weight she had carried for nearly 1,000 years lifted from her completely. Not slowly, not partially, but all at once. For the first time since the beginning, Eve was no longer bound by guilt. She understood. Was science able to offer explanations for the story of Adam and Eve? What does science say about their story? Let's dig into the details of what science reveals about our first ancestors, the hidden story of human origins. Over the last few hundred years, science, especially the study of nature, has opened our eyes to remarkable ideas about how life began and how it has changed over time. One of the most widely accepted explanations today is that all living things are linked. From the tiniest organisms to the largest animals and even to human beings, everything is part of a long, continuous story of life that stretches back billions of years. According to this understanding, human beings did not simply appear all at once in the form we see today. Instead, we are the outcome of a slow and steady process called evolution. This process involves gradual changes happening over very long periods of time. Simple life forms, through small adjustments and improvements, slowly developed into more complex organisms. Over countless generations, this led to the rich variety of living things that now exist on Earth. All life is interconnected like branches of a vast tree, sharing common ancestors that diverge through gradual changes over time. Scientists trace these origins using DNA, a genetic record passed through generations. The Y chromosome reveals paternal lineage, while mitochondrial DNA traces maternal ancestry, helping uncover humanity's deep evolutionary history. By carefully studying these genetic markers, scientists can trace human family lines backward through time. In doing so, they have discovered points where these lines come together. These points lead to what scientists call the most recent common ancestors. It is important to understand what this means. These ancestors were not the only humans alive during their time. Rather, they are simply the most recent individuals from whom all people living today have inherited certain parts of their DNA, either through an unbroken maternal line or an unbroken paternal line. Scientists refer to the maternal common ancestor as mitochondrial Eve. She is believed to have lived around 155,000 years ago. Every human being alive today carries mitochondrial DNA that can be traced back to her. In a similar way, the paternal common ancestor is known as Y chromosomal Adam. He is estimated to have lived between 200,000 and 300,000 years ago, and all living males today share a Y chromosome that traces back to him. However, these names can be misleading if not properly understood. Mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam were not the first humans, nor were they a single couple living together. In fact, they may have lived thousands of years apart. During their lifetimes, many other people were also alive, but over time, some family lines came to an end, perhaps because individuals had no children or only daughters or only sons, while others continued. As generations passed, only certain genetic lines survived, eventually linking all living humans back to these particular individuals through specific paths. Another major finding from scientific research is that modern humans, those who look physically like us today, first appeared in Africa about 300,000 years ago. This conclusion is based on both fossil discoveries and genetic evidence. From Africa, early humans gradually moved to different parts of the world. As they spread out, they adapted to new environments, climates, and challenges, leading to the wide range of cultures and physical features we see among people today. Although the names Adam and Eve are borrowed from religious language, their use in science is purely symbolic. They are simply convenient labels to describe genetic ancestors, not references to a single original pair from whom all humans descended at the same moment. What makes all of this so captivating is the balance between simplicity and complexity. On one hand, the idea that all humans are connected can bring a powerful sense of unity. It reminds us that, despite our differences, we share a common history. On the other hand, the scientific explanation reveals an incredibly detailed and complex journey, one shaped by countless generations, constant movement, and continuous change over vast stretches of time. In the end, modern science offers a view of human origins that is both humbling and inspiring. It tells a story not of an instant beginning, but of a long and winding journey. It is a story that connects every person to a shared past and highlights the delicate and intricate processes that have shaped life on Earth into what it is today. Is science oblivious to Eve's last prophecy? Why can't science offer an explanation? Let's take a look at Eve's scary prophecy, a prophecy of destruction and unthinkable hope. Eve gathers her descendants and surprises them with a profound message, not a farewell. Speaking with calm authority, she shares a vision of the distant future, carrying both warning and hope. Her words feel sacred and weighty, leaving her listeners expecting finality, but receiving a timeless, far-reaching revelation instead. A time, she said, when humanity would lose its way, when people would no longer care for what is right, when corruption would grow so strong that it would touch everything, homes, hearts, and societies. Violence would become normal. Evil would spread like a shadow across the earth until it seemed as though goodness had almost disappeared. Then, she said, something unimaginable would happen. A flood. Not an ordinary flood, but one so vast, so powerful that it would cover the earth itself. Waters would rise beyond imagination, swallowing lands, cities, and even mountains. Life, as people knew it, would be nearly wiped away, but not all would be lost. In the middle of that destruction, there would be mercy. A righteous man, chosen for his faith and obedience, would be saved, along with his family. Through them, life would begin again. Through them, humanity would continue. For a moment, it seemed like the end of the story. But Eve was not finished. She spoke again, this time of something even more final. Another judgment, not by water, but by fire. A cleansing, not just to destroy what is wrong, but to purify what remains. A moment when everything false would be removed, and only what is true and right would stand. By now, her listeners were silent, completely drawn in, their hearts caught between fear and wonder. And then, her tone changed. What came next was different. It was not a warning, it was a promise. Eve spoke of her own lineage, specifically the line of Seth. From that line, she said, would come someone unlike any other, someone who would change everything. A redeemer, one who would succeed where she and Adam had failed, one who would reopen what had been closed since the beginning, restore what had been lost, and lead humanity back to something they had only known once, back to the presence they had lost, back to the nearness, the peace, the light, the fullness of life that once existed in the garden. As she spoke, it was as if a quiet hope entered the hearts of everyone listening. The fear of judgment was still there, but now it was balanced by something greater, hope. When Eve finally fell silent, no one spoke. They had come expecting the last words of an old woman nearing the end of her life. Instead, they had been given a message that stretched far beyond their time, into the future, into generations they would never see. Something eternal. Not long after that gathering, Eve made one final request. She asked to be buried beside Adam. When her time came, her children honored her wish. They carried her gently and laid her to rest next to him, in the place where he had been buried. But as they did, something strange and beautiful happened. A fragrance filled the air. It was not like anything they had ever smelled before. It was sweet, but not in an ordinary way. It was deep, powerful, and almost overwhelming, not in strength, but in meaning. The scent spread beyond the cave, carried by the wind across the land. It moved over mountains and through valleys, reaching people far away. People who had not even been there, and yet they felt it. No one could explain it, no one could fully describe it, but those who sensed it all shared the same feeling, that it was somehow familiar. Not familiar to the mind, but to something deeper, to the soul. It felt like a memory, not of something they had seen, but of something they had once belonged to, a place that felt like home, even though they had never been there, or perhaps had long forgotten. It was as if the fragrance itself carried a message. A quiet reminder of something lost, and a gentle promise that it was not lost forever. Even today, echoes of this story remain preserved in ancient traditions, such as those held by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Passed down through generations, it continues to challenge simple ideas about the beginning of humanity and its purpose. Because in the end, one question still lingers. Was Eden only the place where humanity fell, or was it the first step in a much greater journey? A journey not just of loss, but on return? A journey back home. So, what do you think about the real story of Adam and Eve? Do you believe that science might not be able to explain the prophecies? We'd love to hear your opinions in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.